Good morning. It's great to see all of you guys here today and join us as we continue to explore this idea of what it means to serve. We're calling the series Radical, and it's really what the activity of our faith looks like when we give our allegiance to Jesus and learn how to find his heart and what he longs for the world in which he's created and our part in it. Now, either I'm going to be talking to myself today, which could be quite entertaining for y'all, or we're going to be doing something a little bit different. And as we do, we're going to do something a little bit different. I won't be doing that. I do that enough as it is. But just as a pastor, as someone who has, you start with a vision, you have this little bitty, just sort of fledgling group of people and some of the organizational demands on it, then it grows into something that you really didn't have any business, kind of stewarding and trying to understand what to do with what God is doing in and through our church has been a continual challenge, a continual wrestling for me personally to try not to just make this something bigger or better or more beneficial to me, but to really say, Lord, what do you want for us to be in this city that we have been placed within? And some of the places, not some of the places, throughout the scriptures, you read things like this, and this is from Isaiah 61. And this is what Jesus would quote when he began his public ministry, his first sort of speech in Jerusalem. He quoted from Isaiah 61 when he opened up the scroll, and this is what it says from the prophet Isaiah. "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted and to proclaim freedom for the captives and to release from darkness the prisoners and to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and to provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor." There's something that happens when we move into the world. And this next verse 4, it just says, "They will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places that have long been devastated, and they'll renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations." And you see this vision for what God longs to do in the world. I think the question for me, and that I'll sort of inflict on you, is how seriously do we take God's intention for the renewal of all things? How seriously do we take that? It's one thing if God's just helping us to become better citizens and make our lives work well. It's a whole different idea that God is actually concerned about the renewal of all things, and he's asking and inviting and calling his people to that. And so we partner with a lot of organizations. A couple of our kind of primary partners, one of them we're going to hear from today is Vigilant Hope. And so I'd like to welcome up here Laura Bullock. Laura is the Director of Community Engagement for our partner Vigilant Hope. So y'all welcome Laura Bullock up here with me. Hey, Laura.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for taking some time today. And we've spent a lot of time talking about this, and this could come out, I assure you, in 3 different ways over 3 different services, but it's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
I hope. And so if you'll just take a moment and maybe explain kind of what you do with Vigilant Hope, what Vigilant Hope does, and their philosophy and sort of how, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So Vigilant Hope, we're a local neighborhood-based ministry. Our mission is kind of twofold. So our primary goal is to help the body of Christ in Wilmington love their city well. I think the average follower of Jesus is like, okay, there's over 2,000 verses in my Bible about poverty and justice. If you didn't know that, there's over 2,000. And so if I'm reading my Bible, I'm supposed to love the poor. I'm supposed to love hurting people. But what does that actually look like in 2023 in Wilmington in my life? We kind of get a little paralyzed. So the purpose of Vigilant Hope is to help equip followers of Jesus to figure that out, find where their passion meets the need. But who are we to be teaching that? So we teach workshops and classes and all that good stuff. We're doing some here now. But who are we to teach it if we're not living it ourselves? And so we really focus on a specific neighborhood on the south side of downtown Wilmington. And we have we started with some just really basic front door stuff, eating meals together. So we have 4 community gatherings each week where people from different walks of life eat meals together or spend time together. We spent a lot of time listening to the community to assess and understand what the community was concerned about or the community hoped to see happen in their area. And so out of that bubbled up a need for access to showers for people who are unsheltered. So we have a mobile shower trailer. Out of that, we started to get to know people who didn't want to be on the streets anymore. And so we looked at kind of how do we stand in some gaps, and we started a leadership pipeline that's a leadership development program. In that, we ran into this challenge of economic opportunity. If you haven't had a sustainable job or if you don't have a lot of kind of marketable skills, maybe you need somebody who knows you and who you know and trust to kind of walk alongside. So we started a coffee shop to help fund that work. And so really, we're kind of responding to the concerns and desires of the neighborhood while teaching the church how to do the same.
Before you share your story, can you give us like a picture of what when you say the needs of the neighborhood, we all have a picture in our head, but maybe like help us understand what kind of things are you talking about? Like what does it look like in real life? Like the experience most of us have when you say unsheltered is someone standing on the corner at one of the big intersections with the signs, but there's a lot more to it.
Absolutely.
And what is it that you see, and what's the lay of the land look like in those neighborhoods?
Yeah, well, I always say like Wilmington as a city is known for like our lovely beaches, human trafficking, opioid-related deaths, and the massacre of 1898, right? That's what we're famous for, just FYI. We regularly like top 10 in opioid-related deaths. Like we have a lot of challenges in our city that people are facing. But I think we always say poverty is a relational thing. It's broken relationships with God, self, each other, and creation. And so out of that, we see a lot of people who are suffering with food insecurity. Right. Maybe it's that they have the money for food, but they can't get to a grocery store. It's transportation. We have a lot of people right now, our housing costs are just, we could talk about housing for the rest of this time and have a lot to talk about because a lot of people are just in crisis and stressed. A lot of people don't have the hope of Jesus. A lot of people are working really hard, maybe at multiple jobs, and it doesn't pay the bills. Right. And maybe that's been happening for 3 generations in their family. And so the mental and emotional and spiritual strain of that, there's a lot of heavy loads to be carried. Okay. So, so it does, like one of the phrases you use when we're talking about this, this is specifically about housing, but you use the phrase doubling up. Yeah. That there's numbers that we do point-in-time counts to actually track people who don't have housing or sustainable housing. But there's a whole other group of people who aren't. Talk about what that looks like in sort of the normal course of life. So when you look at statistics for homelessness in our community, for example, because that's what we think about often when we think about housing crisis, we think about like who's on the streets. There's a certain number, like it comes out to a little over 500, I think, unofficially in this city today. But that's just one count on the streets. What we have in our community is a lot of families a lot of kids who don't have a permanent address. But their family lives with grandma for a minute, and then lives with auntie for a minute, and then lives in a motel for a couple of nights while they can pay for it, and then maybe is in the car for a second, and then is in with a friend's house. And so we call that living doubled up when multiple families are living in a space that maybe is only designed for one family. And that's relatively common? Very common, very common. It's a big, more and more and more. Yeah, part of what we want to do is just get a broader picture because we want to get real sort of tactical in what we can do as a church. And what I thought was fascinating, Lauren, when we were talking, is your own personal story. Because I asked you, I said, how did you get into this work? You went to Appalachians? No, you went to UNCW. No, I went to UNCW. Came from Boone. Yeah, outside of Boone. Yeah, came to UNCW. Yeah. Been here ever since, right? Then went back for a few years. Yeah, got this. I'm missing my notes here. So when I asked you, how did you get into this kind of work? Like what prompted it? So I'm a church kid, like hardcore. Like grew up across the yard from the church. Anybody else? Were you like youth group, like 4 times a week church? All the church camp. I know some of you know in here. Oh my gosh, literally all the things. I was like such a like. Did you say your mom was the? So my mom was the choir director, right? And so we were literally there all the time. So mom was the choir director, and so I had this really solid Christian foundation from her. But my father was dealt with addiction, and literally like died from his addiction at a pretty early age. And so I grew up in this really weird environment where there was sort of the chaos of addiction and the stability of like Jesus and somebody who loved the Lord a lot. And this was weird, but it gave me some really clear options, which I'm thankful for. But But for me, looking back now, there was a time when my parents did have to separate and where we needed to just kind of get out of the house that we were in pretty quickly. And the church, our church family literally housed us for almost a year. And looking back with what I know now, what that did, we were a very middle-class family, right? So we had sort of the chaos of addiction, but we had the stability of income. But what happens with divorce? Divorce is one of the leading causes of homelessness because when people untangle, it creates a financial crisis. And so what it gave my mom the opportunity to do was to financially stabilize. It gave us the opportunity to get somewhere safe without committing to like a rental agreement and having to put a whole lot of money up front to pay for temporary housing. So she was able to literally financially untangle, purchase a home. And so there was that economic piece, but there was also, because of the addiction, my dad was a real nice guy when he was sober, but a lot of lies were spoken into my life that could have really shaped my future. But for every lie that was spoken over me, there were like 5 or 6 church people who were speaking life into me. And that literally, I followed Jesus. They showed me who Jesus, they taught me about Jesus, but I followed Jesus because they showed me the character and nature of God. Yeah. So I know what the church can do, all that to say. I know what the church can do and can be because I'm a product of God at work in the church. And so then I went to Haiti on my first mission trip, this medical trip. I'm holding this baby that's starving to death, literally starving to death. Or I go, into a homeless shelter for the first time, and I'm like, whoa, I know what the church can do, but where are we here? I see this opportunity.
Yeah.
It's opportunity. So I want to help the church be that.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here.
It's so great because the thing that's helped me is you see this because it's the need's overwhelming and you get, and you don't know what to do. We've all dealt with this. You just don't know what to do, and we're always afraid that whatever we do is not going to be helpful. It's going to actually do the opposite, right. Or all the different stories we tell ourselves. And the thing that I thought was powerful when you said this is you said the church operated sort of kept you middle class. Yeah. It kept you from sliding into poverty. So there were some prevention things that happened in that, which I know we've got people who are doing a lot of work, probably unintentionally in these areas when they open their homes to various types of scenarios going on. When we think about the overwhelming need, right, there's so much to do. I think one of the other things Lou mentioned this is when you wrote this down, I wrote down in my notes that you fundamentally see the church as a place that can bring this way of life, on the actual earth. Yeah. That there's something we can actually do that shapes the trajectory of how people experience their lives, particularly when they've been just demolished for so long.
Absolutely.
Part of what you were talking about and what some of the things you guys teach is a lot of these areas. I grew up thinking that the social justice gospel was something other than biblical. I don't know if y'all have ever had that experience, but that's how I grew up. And it wasn't bad. It was just that was the perspective of the culture. And I've come to learn and see, just like I read earlier, that it's, you mentioned it's 2,000 verses. How do we maybe sort of break some of these things down? I know we were talking about this passage from Luke chapter 7. So if you want to just kind of talk about that for a minute and give us a little bit broader light into how we usually think about it.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I did the same. I grew up and I was kind of taught to fear the word justice, right? That might separate me from Jesus in some way. And then I kept finding it in my Bible. And I was like, well, wait a second. Yeah. What is this? So this biblical perspective of what God does. So Luke 7, I think is just, man, I love to talk about the widow of Nain. So there's this story in Luke 7. And basically what's happening is Jesus is traveling with his disciples. Yeah. At this point, there's a pretty big crowd that's traveling with him. And they pass by the entrance of this town, and there's another big crowd. It's a funeral. And this woman, they're this woman's son's funeral, and she's a widow. So she's lost her, it says her husband and also her only son. And the text says, in the midst of these two crowds, Jesus sees her and his heart breaks for her. One translation says his heart breaks for her, or moved with compassion. And so he literally breaks up their journey. He goes over to her. And what he sees, and I think the reason his heart breaks, is this widow has lost her only son, which, I know there's been a lot of loss in this room, the depth of grief of losing a child alone. The depth of grief of losing a child and a husband, that is enough to break your heart. But for her, when you look at culture, when you look at ancient Near Eastern culture, this widow in losing her only son and her husband, she has lost like all protection and provision, right? I've studied her, right? She's probably going to be able to keep her house, maybe, but like if anything happens to the roof, there's going to be she's going to be dependent on charity to help fix the roof. There are charity programs within the church at that time, but they're in Jerusalem. So she's got to figure out how to get to Jerusalem to get food, to charity food, and then to figure out how to get it back home. And then on top of that, socially, like culturally, when bad things happen to people, there was like an honor shame culture situation. Yeah. So they're going to look at her, like all those people are looking, going, whoa, her husband and her son? What great sin, what did she do? Which I don't think it's that different from us, right? Like, I mean, how often do we look at somebody
we love karma,
lost
right?
in addiction, somebody on that street corner, and we're like, what did they do to get themselves into that? I mean, it's the same mentality, right? So they're thinking, what great sin did she commit? So socially, they're probably going to be like, ooh, let's hang back from this sinner, right? So economically, she's destroyed. Socially, she's destroyed. She's also probably going, what did I do? Because that's how they perceived God at that time. But we know that's not how God is, because Jesus,
clearly so,
he is the embodiment of God, and it broke his heart. So Jesus goes over, and he raises the son from the dead. And so we see that, we're like, cool, miracle, and that's great, right? Relationship restored with the son. But in doing that, he restores her socioeconomically. He restores her relationally, sense of relationship to family and also to her community. And obviously, I think she's probably going, this guy is the one, right? Restores her spiritually. And so, when we look at all these miracles in the Gospels, that happens all the time. Yeah. Like every time there's more to it than just the withered hand or the ability to walk. He's restoring people for purpose and for provision. And so,
and this goes along with this. I was listening to you talk about that in a place where you were teaching. It was really, really insightful. I remember years ago, I was at a conference, and it was about helping in poverty, and the guy who was teaching the seminar put up a cartoon, and it had people, these kind of obviously well-to-do people on a truck, and then all the people who lived in poverty were down below the truck, and they were throwing bread from the truck, and the caption at the bottom simply said, "Don't throw bread from the truck."
Yeah.
And the point is that you can't tackle these issues from a distance.
Right.
You have to get proximate to them. And part of what happened with Jesus, right? He just entered right into the mess. But one of the things that I'd love for you to talk about is not only the proximity, but when you were saying this, you used the phrase that it was protection, and she lost her protection in her advocacy.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we think of advocacy, especially today, as more of awareness and it's more of a legal or a political advocacy. But talk about what proximity and the advocacy of the church might look like for our congregation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think advocacy is another word that people are like,
right.
Right. You get nervous
what's
around.
your agenda?
There's usually this sort of assumption of an agenda. But the Holy Spirit is our advocate, right? The Holy Spirit is our advocate. So I think what happens when you get close to someone, right? When you get near to someone who is hurting, when someone you love is hurting, it matters to you. And you want to, the first thing we typically want to do is fix it, but we're not right. Jesus, so sometimes we can't fix it ourselves, or maybe it's not our place to fix it. But you want to advocate, you want to create opportunities for somebody. Like if somebody doesn't have a job and you see them just so discouraged and frustrated because they cannot find a job, you want to who do I know?
Right.
Who am I connected to? What door might I be able to help open so that person can get a job? Yeah. It doesn't, and it matters to us when we know that person because we care for them.
Yeah.
So I think, the church, I think for a long time, I was kind of raised to believe that mission was telling people about Jesus and also probably cooking food for people who are hungry, right? Like it's a symptom, right? Yep. People are hungry, let's get them some food. It's folding the clothes at the donation drive. Don't hate donation drives. We need donation drives, right?
Right.
But we often see that as the mission, and we kind of check it off. We do it quarterly, and then we move on. Where often, to me, our pancake breakfasts are our front door. It's actually we're like, hey, yeah, come make a pancake, because that's what we've been taught we're supposed to do. But then we're hoping that you're going to get to know people that maybe don't come from the same life circumstance as you. And you'll learn from each other. Because God is already at work in the inner city. God is already doing beautiful things there. We don't have to go bring Jesus. We just meet Jesus there, just to be clear.
Yeah.
Jesus is already at work in the inner city. We just get to meet him there. But then we start to care. And so I think the power of the local church is, like, think about the number of humans that we in this room know.
Yeah.
The number of connections that we have, the dollar amount of resources that the church has that isn't bound by government rules. It's not bound by, anything but the power of the Most High God. Yeah. And we are responsible to steward that, and we have the opportunity to. So, I think about, my friends who are suffering on the streets, and, people are hurting. And then I think about, we have an opportunity here.
Yeah. And I think, it's one of the mantras we use around Port City is, tell me a name and tell me a story. People always want to talk about issues. And issues are fun and they're nice to debate, and you can get really, I know all about this, but to meet a person with a name and with a story automatically changes almost everything about the way you think about it. You have to really, at least for me, this is my experience, I can feel myself trying to pull away because what is going to be required to care. And some of the things where I have a lot of confidence now in us, who we've become, I really believe our church has become something fundamentally different than we were. And there's a readiness and a will that I think we have. And so part of what I want for us to do is to begin to ask God for a vision for what it looks like for us. And the thing is, it's not going to fall on you or you or you or you or me. It's going to fall on us. And more importantly, it's going to fall on God's heart, who is far more interested in this than we are, and to allow him to form us into the kind of people who are willing to do these kinds of things. We'll talk more about what to do in just a minute. The reason I bring that up is because I think, one of the things that we want to do, and I think you alluded to this, we always want to immediately fix, right? One of the philosophies we've really appreciated about Vigilant Hope, and this is why we partner with Vigilant Hope very directly and very intentionally, and it's because of the relational ministry that they do. It starts there. One of the things that I've discovered in my own exploration, and I've written about this quite a bit, but is that redemption is relational. When God came to redeem us, he came to first and foremost restore us to a relationship with him. And the same work is going to happen. In order for us to do the kind of work that's going to be required for, I believe, the state of poverty, it's the same thing. We've got to learn how to get relational. We have to learn how to do it. And this is where I think you guys are such a great place for us. Can you talk about sort of proximity and the breakfast and what that looks like if I were to go and do that this weekend or on Monday night, and kind of talk about the philosophy and what happens in those settings?
Yeah. So, our kind of simple perspective is you can't love somebody you don't know. Not well, not deeply.
Right.
I've been married to the wonderful Corey Bullock for 13 years now. And when I married him, I thought I knew him so well, and I thought I was so good at loving him. But those of you who've been married for a minute know how funny and silly that is. Because, the longer we know each other and the better we know each other, the more effectively I can love him, and the more effectively I can receive love. He can love me, and relationships are always that way. So the more intimately I know the Lord, the better I understand the character and nature of God. And so it's the same. So our meals are, they're a front door. So one thing that, I always try to give people permission. Okay, when we think about going overseas, church kid, right? My old school mission trip days, I would need to know, how long does my skirt need to be for this culture as a woman? Do I need to cover my shoulders? What are a couple of words of the language? How can I learn a little bit about the culture of the space I'm stepping into? That's normal for us to do when we're going overseas. What we don't do is when we say, if I'm not from the south side of downtown Wilmington, if I'm not from another part of our community, maybe it's okay for me. I have permission to learn a little bit about the culture and the people that live there, because we are doing cross-cultural work. Yep. And that's the beauty. The body of Christ is meant to be cross-cultural. And so, so I think what we do is we have community meals because everybody needs to eat, right? So our meals are a little bit different. We are not a soup kitchen. We will tell you that 20 times. I actually have some of my community meal leaders here today that will be leading you if you come eat breakfast with us one Saturday. So we help. You can cook. You'll get to kind of work that like Martha muscle of flipping the pancake, wrapping some silverware, but then we're all going to sit down together. We're going to eat breakfast. We're going to play bingo, and it will be competitive, right? Like, that's what we're going to do because that's a way that we build relationship with each other. So it's meant to be a front door. It's meant to be a space where if you're not in the habit of getting to know people from a different walk of life.
Yep.
But we've seen pretty radical things come out of just eating together.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what you can expect. We're going to eat together. Like, come hungry. You're not taking food from someone who's hungry because we're not a soup kitchen. We have soup kitchens. Right. We're a community meal where we practice being together.
Yeah. And it's such a radically different way to think about, like, when we go to serve, like, the less fortunate, or how we'd say that, we're doing something for them. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that, if you go in my office on my board, it says, we do things for the world by doing things with other people.
Amen.
With.
That's good.
It's always with. And, my own, again, sort of my own experience, this is sort of it's been about a 10-year learning curve, but there's so many things you just feel so much pressure to do. And there's so many things I look and go, we can't do it. Just can't get there yet. And so I always try to back up to what can I do. And, we were talking about this, like getting someone's name. We've got some experiences here at the church with that. But just the dignity of listening to someone when you sit down with someone at the pancake and just ask them their story, and they get a chance to share or to tell you their name and what they think and where it's a dignity. It extends and values the dignity and the worth in another human being by just listening to their story. And so one of the things I love about you guys is you've been able to start really in those places where any one of us can step in and begin to learn and to grow and to also be effective. The second thing, so one is the Saturday, when are the meals
So
done?
we eat together on Monday and Saturday mornings, okay. And then we have potluck on Thursday nights.
Okay, and all this will be, information will be available, and anybody we're going to actually invite you all to do this. The second thing is that we have coming up is the workshop.
Yeah.
And talk about this, because this is one of the things where you said we were talking about the church, this isn't just about flipping pancakes or serving meals. There's actually a lot of other things that are needed in the way the church functions and works together.
Absolutely, yeah. So like our goal at Vigilant is to set you free from the idea, like if you're a terrible cook, please don't come cook, right? We don't need you to cook. We need you to like you are created with gifts, skills, passions, and abilities that God put in you. And something has happened in the church, we're all recovering from it now, but like it's still in us, is we turn all of that off when we think about mission and service. But actually I will be so bold as to say, like, what we need the body of Christ to realize in our city is that your gifts, skills, passions, and abilities are probably exactly what we need. And there is this beautiful sweet spot, or maybe a few options of sweet spots, where your gifts, skills, passions, and abilities match the need in the community, and you're going to thrive in it. You're not going to hate it. Like, you're not going to see me in Grow Zone. All right?
We probably need to talk about that, though.
You're not going to see me in Grow Zone, right? That's not my gift, skill, passion. Yeah. That's not my spot. Yeah. My spot is like, out. I have found this place where I thrive and I'm most useful, and that's where you need me to be. Yeah. And each one of you has that place. And so we talk about shalom a lot, this idea of like what God's vision is. Like the opposite of poverty is not wealth. All the wealthy people would be happy. The opposite of poverty is this flourishing relationship with God, self, each other, and creation. And so we each have a thread, like this like tapestry of all these complex pieces brought together to make something whole and beautiful. So we each have a thread. So that all those words to say, the workshop is designed to kind of be a first step for you if you're like, okay, I want to serve effectively. I want to kind of know if I'm doing something harmful, I want to kind of get a heads up that this might not be very helpful, but here are some first steps toward finding that place that is my sweet spot. So whether you've been serving for a long time or you're kind of like, okay, let me just stick a toe in, like this is that perfect opportunity.
Because this will be a way to point to, like, we work with Step Up Wilmington, which is job training, and there's practice interviews and all kinds of things that go into that. And you guys work with a lot of these other organizations, so it's not just about getting involved with Vigilant Hope and finding a pigeonhole or a puzzle piece, the round hole, but rather it's about really understanding. You guys have an understanding of what's happening in our whole community. You know, part of our pledge as a church, because this isn't to say that you need to do something every Saturday of your week. What we recognize, and part of our effort and the way we're trying to structure and arrange as a church, is we want to ensure that whatever you do is going to be meaningful to you and your family. We talk about accessible. It's going to be accessible to you and your family where you are, with the experience you have, with the age that your children are, the season of life that you're in, because we know what that's like, right? And so we want to make sure that it's accessible for you and it's going to be meaningful to you in your walk and to your sense of participating in what God is doing. We want to make sure that's happening. And also we want it to be effective. Like part of what we are committed to, we're not just trying to make people feel better about themselves, about doing something for people. We want to actually move the needle in some of the areas of poverty, food security, and meaningful employment. We can't do a lot with affordable housing yet, but make no mistake about it, we're going to be trying to put as much pressure in as many places as possible. But it starts when we learn how to have relationships, when we start to invest in relationships and start doing things with other people. So these two things are going to be a part of that. And so just to sort of sum up, and Laura, just thank you so much for the work that you guys do. One more thing, for those of you who don't know, we have a Vigilant Hope coffee shop in our space, and you guys run it.
Yeah.
How helpful is that to you guys?
Yeah, oh my gosh. So like literally the easiest way to support us is to just buy coffee. It's so simple, y'all. But here's why, because it's not just about like making money for, like it does help pay our bills, but really what that does is it provides kind of like what happened with the widow. So like we have intentionally hired a few community members that like used to use our shower trailer and now they run it, or used to depend on resources and now, and that coffee shop funds their job. Yeah. And it funds that holistic, we're able to come in and say, okay, let's figure out together housing and transportation and employment and all those things all together at once. And so literally just by drinking coffee, you're contributing to that shalom.
So yay, perfect.
Yeah,
So,
drink coffee.
Drink coffee.
Volunteer in the coffee shop.
Yeah, all these things are, but these are ways for us as a church to extend ourselves in ways that are available to us. And so the two things that you can do is to go and sign up for a meal and actually go and have pancakes or the community meal on Monday night or Thursday. Is that correct? You can actually do that. We'll help schedule and organize. We don't need 400 people to show up tomorrow night. That would probably be a problem. So we'll help organize and schedule that as we need, and to make a plan to be at the community workshop, at the workshop on June the 4th. Is that the time? I think Clay's going to give us some more details on that. So I hope this, for all of us, is helpful to begin to get a picture and understanding what's happening and the role that we have as a church. And when I was praying for our time this morning, I was like, Lord, would you help us to measure the effectiveness of this time together by what we are willing to consider, by what you and I are willing to consider about what is happening in the world and what we're learning about what's happening in our very own city, and how we can actually be a part of moving the needle and bringing redemptive hope into these places. Laura, thank you for your work. Thank you so much for your time. Can we say thank you to Laura Bullock for being here? And Clay, if you'll come on up. Clay's got some instructions for us.